The plumber called at 9:14 on a Tuesday morning. I was sitting at the kitchen table with my second cup of coffee, watching the birds at the feeder my wife had hung from the oak tree the spring before she died. His name was Gary Hutchins, a stocky man in his mid-40s who ran a one-man operation out of a beat-up white van with a leaking faucet painted on the side. I had hired him to fix a slow leak under the utility sink in my wife's old craft room in the basement. I had been putting it off for almost 2 years, kept telling myself I'd get to it. The truth was, I couldn't bring myself to go down there. The room still smelled like her. He'd been working for about 40 minutes when my phone buzzed on the table. Mr. Calloway. His voice was low, almost careful. Something strange in the way he shaped the words. I need you to come down here. Not urgent, like there's a flood or anything. Just I found something, and I think you need to see it yourself. Is something wrong with the pipes? The pipes are fine, sir. It's something else. Can you just come down? I set my coffee mug on the table and looked out at the backyard for a moment. The cardinal my wife had loved was sitting on the feeder, red as a match head against the gray November sky. Then I walked to the basement door and went down the stairs. Gary was standing in the middle of my wife's craft room with his hands at his sides, not touching anything, the way a man stands when he realizes he's walked into something that isn't his business. He was looking at the far wall, the one behind the shelves where she had kept her fabric and yarn and the little bins of buttons she collected from thrift stores. The shelves had been pushed aside. I could see the scrape marks on the concrete floor where they had swung outward on some kind of hinge. Behind them was a door. Not a real door, no handle, no frame, just a section of drywall cut to fit, painted the same flat gray as the rest of the basement wall. It was open maybe 4 inches, pulled outward, revealing darkness behind it. I was moving the shelves to get better access to the wall, Gary said. And when I pushed on that section, it just opened. I didn't break anything, Mr. Calloway. It was built to open. I stood there looking at it. I haven't touched anything inside, he said. Looked in with my flashlight, but I didn't go in. I walked to the door and pulled it open the rest of the way. Gary handed me his work light without a word. I shone it inside. The space was maybe 5 feet wide and 6 feet deep, carved out of what I had always assumed was dead storage behind the foundation wall. A folding camp chair sat open in the corner. On a small table, a card table, the kind we used for jigsaw puzzles at Christmas, sat a metal lockbox, a manila envelope with my name written on the front, and a laptop computer in a padded case. Along the left wall, mounted on a sheet of pegboard, were printed photographs, handwritten notes on index cards, and newspaper clippings connected with red thread. In the bottom corner, a small battery-operated lantern was still glowing, dim and orange, almost dead after God only knows how long. I looked at my name on the envelope for a long time. Gary cleared his throat behind me. You want me to wait upstairs? Please, I said. My voice came out smaller than I intended. Yes, please wait upstairs. He went without another word. I heard his footsteps on the stairs, heard him move into the kitchen above my head. I pulled the camp chair over, sat down, picked up the envelope, and opened it. The letter inside was 3 pages, handwritten on yellow legal pad paper in my wife's handwriting, that familiar mix of print and cursive she'd had since she was a girl, the way her lowercase e always looked like a backwards 3. I had loved that handwriting for 31 years. I started reading. My darling, if you're reading this, it means I ran out of time. I'm sorry. I wanted to be the one to tell you. I wanted to sit across the kitchen table from you with a cup of tea and explain everything myself. Watch your face. Hold your hand through the hard parts. I'm so sorry I didn't get to do that. I need you to understand why I kept this from you. Not to protect myself. I was never trying to protect myself. I kept it from you because I was afraid that if you knew, you would try to stop me. Or worse, that they would come after you and the kids to stop me. I couldn't let that happen. I hope you can forgive me for making that decision alone. Here is the truth. In the spring of 2019, I started working part-time as a patient advocate at Hargrove Medical Center. You remember how excited I was. After 30 years of teaching, I wanted to do something that felt more immediate, more personal, helping patients understand their treatment options, navigate insurance claims, talk to doctors who never seem to have enough time. I loved it. You know I did. What I didn't expect was what I found. It started with a woman named Patrice. 72 years old, in the hospital for a hip replacement, routine surgery. Everything went fine. But when her insurance claim came back, 3 procedures had been billed that she'd never had. Not minor charges, one of them was a cardiac catheterization. She had never been near the cardiac unit. When she brought it to the billing department, they apologized, said it was a clerical error, corrected the claim, and that should have been the end of it. But I kept thinking about Patrice, so I started paying attention. Not snooping, not at first, just paying attention. And I noticed that billing errors like the one Patrice had experienced weren't random. They clustered around certain attending physicians. And the procedures being billed fraudulently were always ones that Medicare and private insurance paid out quickly with minimal review. Cardiology, neurology, oncology, the big money procedures. I brought it to my supervisor. She told me to stay in my lane. I should have stopped there. You would have told me to stop there, and you would have been right. But I couldn't look at those patients, most of them elderly, most of them scared, most of them from the kind of families where a surprise medical bill for $40,000 means losing a house, and pretend I hadn't seen what I'd seen. So I started keeping records. Quietly, carefully. Every case I could document. Over 2 years, I built a file. The evidence is in the lockbox. The combination is the year we got married, plus the year Daniel was born. You'll know the number. The man behind it is the hospital's chief of revenue operations. His name is Warren Hollis. He's been running a Medicare fraud operation for at least 6 years, maybe longer. Conservative estimates from the documents I gathered put the total at somewhere between $4 and $8 million, billed to federal insurance programs for procedures that were never performed on patients who were never given a choice. But there's something else you need to know, and this is the part I'm most sorry about. In January of this year, Hollis found out I was asking questions. I don't know who told him. Maybe no one, maybe he's just careful and he noticed. He came to find me in the patient lounge one afternoon, sat down across from me, very calm, very quiet, and told me that I seemed like a woman who cared deeply about her family. He said he hoped nothing ever happened to disrupt our peaceful life. He mentioned your name. He mentioned Daniel and Claire by name. I went home that night and I built this room. I know how that sounds. I know you're probably sitting there thinking your wife of 31 years had lost her mind. But I want you to understand I could not go to the local authorities. Hollis has relationships with people in this county. I found 2 instances in the paperwork where billing discrepancies were flagged by a state auditor and the complaints were closed with no action. Someone helped him make those complaints disappear. What I need you to do is take everything in this room to the FBI. The field office in Hartford. Do not go to the local police. Do not go to the hospital administration. Do not talk to anyone at Hargrove before you go. Ask for an agent named Robert Finley. He's with the Healthcare Fraud Division. I wrote to him 8 months ago through the FBI tip portal and gave him enough to let him know this was real. He wrote back asking for documentation. I was still building the case when whatever happened, happened. He'll know who you are. Tell him Dorothy Calloway sent you. I love you more than you will ever fully know. 31 years, and I never once took a single Tuesday morning with you for granted. Never once forgot how lucky I was that you were mine. Please don't grieve me so long that you forget to live. You know I'll be furious with you if you do. Tell Daniel his mother is proud of every choice he's ever made. Tell Claire that the stubbornness I always pretended to be exasperated by is actually my favorite thing about her. It's going to carry her everywhere she wants to go. Take care of the birds. Fill the feeder every other day or the cardinal gets mean. All my love. Always. Dorothy. I don't know how long I sat in that little room. At some point, Gary came back down the stairs and stood in the doorway for a minute and then went back up without saying anything. He was a good man that way, Gary Hutchins. He understood something without needing it explained to him. Let me tell you about my wife. We met in the fall of 1992 at a school board meeting in the town where we both grew up. I was 34, recently divorced, working as a civil engineer for a firm that specialized in bridge inspections. She was 32, third-grade teacher at Lincoln Elementary, and she was at that meeting to argue against a proposed budget cut to the arts program. I had come because the proposed cut also involved reducing maintenance funding for the gymnasium roof, which I happened to know was one hard winter away from a serious structural problem. We were seated next to each other in the folding chairs along the wall, both of us waiting for agenda items that wouldn't come up until the second hour of the meeting. She leaned over at some point and whispered that she had brought a thermos of coffee and did I want some, because we were going to be here a while and the town hall coffee was genuinely terrible. I said yes. I've never stopped being grateful for that yes. We were married 18 months later. Daniel came along in 1995. Claire in 1998. Dorothy taught third grade for 30 years and never once, not in 3 decades, stopped treating it like the most important work in the world. She used to say that every child has one teacher who makes them feel seen, really seen. And if you get to be that teacher for even one kid in your whole career, you've done something that matters. She was that teacher for dozens of them. Parents stopped her in the grocery store years after their children had moved on to 4th grade and 5th grade and middle school and high school. She remembered every single one of their names. She retired in 2018 and went looking for something new to do with herself because my wife was not a woman who sat still. She found the patient advocate position at Hargrove and threw herself into it the same way she'd thrown herself into everything her entire life. I never suspected anything was wrong. That is the thing I have had the hardest time forgiving myself for. She was quieter in her last year, yes, more distracted. Occasionally I would find her standing at the kitchen window looking at nothing. But I told myself it was the adjustment to retirement. I told myself it was normal. I did not ask enough questions. She died in March of last year. The doctors said it was a heart attack, sudden and massive, in the early morning hours. She was 63 years old. She had no history of heart disease. Her annual checkup the previous October had come back clean. I asked questions at the time. I asked a lot of questions. The cardiologist was patient and thorough and kind, and he explained that this kind of event can occur without warning, that the risk factors are not always visible in standard screening. I accepted it. I had no reason not to. Now I stood in my dead wife's secret room, holding a letter that told me there was a man named Warren Hollis who had threatened her by name, threatened our children by name, 7 months before she died. I went upstairs. Gary was sitting at the kitchen table with his hands wrapped around a mug of coffee he had made himself. He looked up when I came in. "Gary," I said, "I need to ask you to do something, and I need you to trust me." He nodded. "I need you to finish fixing the leak. Do whatever you need to do down there. But I need you to forget you moved those shelves." He was quiet for a moment. His eyes were careful. "My wife," I said slowly, "left some documents down there. Personal things. I need to handle them privately, through the right channels, before anyone else knows they exist. Can you do that for me?" He looked at me for another long moment. Then he stood up, picked up his coffee mug, and walked back toward the basement door. "I came here to fix a leak," he said. "Shelf was already moved when I got here." I sat at the kitchen table for 2 hours after he left. I read the letter 4 more times. Then I went back downstairs, opened the lockbox. The combination was 1993, the year we were married. Followed by 1995, the year Daniel was born, and I spent the rest of the afternoon going through what my wife had built. The lockbox contained 3 USB drives and a small bound notebook filled with dates, names, and case numbers in Dorothy's careful handwriting. The manila folders stacked in the back of the compartment held printed copies of billing records, insurance claims with specific line items circled in red pen, and a typed summary document my wife had clearly written as a guide for whoever eventually found the room. 7 pages, single-spaced, organized by year, by patient case, by procedure code. She had been a third-grade teacher for 3 decades. She understood how to make complicated things clear. The photographs on the pegboard told the rest of the story. Warren Hollis meeting with a man in a parking garage. Hollis handing an envelope to someone through a car window. Dates and times written on index cards beneath each photo. My wife had taken all of them from her own car, parked at angles where she could see without being seen, a telephoto lens she had quietly purchased for the purpose. I had thought she bought that camera for bird watching. I stayed up until 2 in the morning reading everything. By the time I went to bed, I understood the scope of it. Dozens of patients. Millions of dollars billed to Medicare and private insurers for procedures that existed only on paper. A network of physicians and billing coders who either participated or looked the other way. And at the center of it, Warren Hollis, who had spent years using the complexity of hospital billing as cover for a fraud operation that was, in my wife's careful estimation, among the largest of its kind in New England. I called the FBI field office in Hartford the next morning. It took most of the day to get through to the right person. When I finally reached Agent Robert Finley and told him my name, there was a pause on the line. "Dorothy Calloway," he said quietly. "Your wife contacted me last year. She left me a letter," I said. Another pause. "Mr. Calloway, I want you to listen to me carefully. If you have documentation, we want to see it. All of it. Can you come to Hartford?" "I can come today." "Come today," he said. "And don't discuss this with anyone until you get here." I packed everything into 2 cardboard boxes, put the laptop in the padded case Dorothy had left for it, and drove to Hartford. Agent Finley met me in a conference room with 2 other agents and a woman from the Department of Health and Human Services who specialized in Medicare fraud investigations. I set the boxes on the table and watched their expressions change as they opened the first folder. "Your wife built this case for 2 years, Agent Finley said, after about an hour. He said it not like a compliment, but like something that cost him something to say. This is serious, thorough work. This is more than we had." "She was a 3rd-grade teacher," I said. "She knew how to organize information." He looked at me. Then he looked back at the folder. "We're going to need some time to work through this," he said. "I need you to go home, speak to no one, and wait for my call. We'll need your cooperation when we move forward. But Mr. Calloway, I want you to know if this holds up the way it looks. Your wife built enough here to put Hollis away for a very long time." I drove home and sat in the kitchen and looked at the bird feeder. The cardinal came at dusk. I got up and filled the feeder. The FBI worked fast. Agent Finley told me later that Dorothy's case file gave them enough to open a formal investigation within a week, and that the digital evidence on the USB drive's recordings of Hollis discussing billing strategy with co-conspirators on the phone, timestamps matching the dates in Dorothy's notebook, was more than they had expected. Forensic accountants traced $6.4 million in fraudulent Medicare billing over a 7-year period. A billing supervisor and 2 attending physicians who had participated in exchange for kickbacks cooperated with investigators in exchange for reduced charges. There was also the question of my wife's death. I had asked Agent Finley about it directly, sitting in his office on my 2nd visit. "Dorothy was healthy," I said. "She was 63 and had no heart history, and she died 7 months after a man threatened her in a hospital lounge. I need you to look at that." He had looked at me with an expression that was neither confirming nor dismissing what I'd said. "We're looking at everything, Mr. Calloway," he said. 3 months into the investigation, I got a call. They had requested access to Dorothy's medical records and autopsy report as part of the broader investigation into Hollis's activities. The medical examiner's original findings had noted elevated levels of a cardiac glycoside, a class of compound that includes both naturally occurring substances and certain medications, but had attributed it to a supplement Dorothy had been taking for fatigue. The levels were consistent with accidental overdose or with a supplement interaction. No further investigation had been recommended. With fresh eyes, and with the context of who Warren Hollis was and what he was capable of, the determination was different. The levels were not consistent with accidental overdose. They were consistent with deliberate administration. And Warren Hollis, as Chief of Revenue Operations at Hargrove Medical Center, had access to every medication in that facility. I had to sit down when Agent Finley told me. She was murdered. The evidence supports that conclusion, he said. We're adding a charge. I had accepted her death. I had grieved her, buried her, rebuilt my routines around the fact of her absence. I had stopped asking questions because the answers I'd been given seemed reasonable. And all the while the man who killed her had continued going to work at the hospital where she had spent 2 years building a case against him. Had continued collecting a salary and attending meetings and parking in the employee lot and walking through the lobby like a man with nothing to hide. He had attended the memorial service. I remembered him now, a tall man, mid-50s, silver at his temples, the kind of man who projects authority without trying. He had shaken my hand at the reception afterward and told me Dorothy had been an exceptional advocate for the patients she worked with. He said the hospital would feel her absence. I had thanked him. I called my son that night. He lives in Portland now, works in urban planning, married with 2 kids of his own. He picked up on the second ring. Dad? What's wrong? I need to tell you some things about your mother, I said. I told him everything. I heard him go very quiet on the other end, the particular kind of quiet that is a person holding themselves together. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment. She knew, he finally said. She knew he might kill her, and she kept building the case anyway. Yes. Dad, he said, and his voice broke just slightly. She was the bravest person I've ever known. I called my daughter next. She's in Boston, works as a nurse practitioner, single, fierce about the things she cares about. She got angry, good and proper angry in the way that Dorothy had always said Claire would someday aim at something that deserved it. She wanted to drive up that night. I told her to wait. She didn't like that, but she waited. On a Thursday morning in April, 2 federal agents walked into Hargrove Medical Center and arrested Warren Hollis in the atrium in front of a waiting room full of patients and staff. He was escorted through the lobby in handcuffs, past the patient services desk where Dorothy used to sit 3 mornings a week, past the reception area where she had first noticed that Patrice's billing statement didn't add up. I wasn't there. I watched the report on the evening news, sitting in the kitchen with a cup of coffee. The chair where Dorothy used to sit pulled close to mine the way she used to do in the evenings when we watched television together. The news anchor described the charges: Medicare fraud, conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and first-degree murder. The cameras caught a brief glimpse of Hollis in a gray suit being guided to a waiting vehicle, his face turned away from the lens. My daughter called before the segment was over. She was crying. They got him, Dad. They got him, I said. The trial was a year in the making and lasted 6 weeks. I attended every day and sat in the gallery where Hollis could see me if he chose to look, which he rarely did. The prosecution presented Dorothy's evidence in sequence, the way she had organized it by year, by patient, by case. Her typed summary was entered into evidence and read aloud in the courtroom, her clear and methodical language filling the room. I watched the jurors' faces as they listened. On the 3rd week, the prosecution played a recording from one of Dorothy's USB drives. It was audio, captured on her phone during a hospital staff meeting, and it included a segment where Hollis, apparently not aware he was being recorded, discussed with a billing manager which procedure codes were least likely to trigger an audit review. His voice was matter-of-fact, almost bored, the way you'd discuss a routine logistical problem. And then, toward the end of the trial, they played something I hadn't known existed. Among the files on Dorothy's laptop was a video recording she had made, alone in the little room behind the shelves, sitting in that camp chair, speaking directly into the camera. It was dated 6 weeks before she died. The prosecution had flagged it as a contingency statement. My wife, in her thorough and orderly way, had decided to put her case on record in her own voice in case the documents were somehow challenged or dismissed. She was wearing the blue cardigan she wore on cold mornings in the house. Her reading glasses were pushed up on her head. She looked straight at the camera and spoke for 22 minutes, walking through her evidence, explaining her reasoning, naming names and dates and case numbers from memory. She looked tired, but she looked calm. She looked like herself. At the end of the recording, she paused for a moment, and then she said, "I know what I'm doing is risky. I know there are people who will say I should have walked away, let someone else handle it, protected myself first. But those patients are real people. Patrice is a real person. Every name in my notebook is a real person who was frightened and sick and trusted that the people caring for them were acting in good faith. I couldn't walk away from that. I wouldn't know how. The courtroom was completely silent. I held Dorothy's letter in my hands, the yellow legal pad pages she had written in her backwards Z handwriting, and I looked at the empty chair beside me, the chair I had pulled close to mine every day of the trial out of a habit I could not break. The jury deliberated for 4 days. Guilty on all counts. When the verdict was read, Warren Hollis finally looked at me. For a moment, we simply looked at each other across that courtroom. I didn't say anything. I just held up Dorothy's letter so he could see it. The letter she had written, knowing he would probably kill her. The letter that had found its way into the open because a plumber noticed that a wall sounded hollow. I am 66 years old now. I still live in the same house. I still fill the bird feeder every other day. The craft room in the basement is empty now, the evidence with the FBI, the camp chair folded up and donated, the pegboard taken down. I had a contractor rebuild the wall, reinstall the shelves the way they were before, repaint everything the flat gray it had always been. The room looks like it was never there, but I kept one thing, the small battery-powered lantern that had been burning in the corner when Gary found the door, faint and orange and nearly dead after months alone in the dark. I cleaned it up, replaced the batteries, and set it on the kitchen windowsill next to the bird feeder. I turn it on some evenings when the light is going. I don't know exactly why. It seems right. Dorothy's story became known. The news coverage was extensive, a retired school teacher turned patient advocate, building a case alone for 2 years, hiding her evidence in a room she built herself, preparing a letter for the husband she expected to outlive her. Several of her former patients reached out. Patrice, the woman whose billing error had started everything, wrote me a letter by hand. 3 pages on pale pink stationery, telling me that my wife had sat with her in the hospital room on a Tuesday afternoon and explained her insurance claim line by line and never made her feel foolish for not understanding it. She said she had kept Dorothy's business card in her Bible. The hospital where Dorothy worked underwent a federal audit and a complete restructuring of its billing practices. The billing manager who had cooperated with investigators was sentenced to 4 years. One of the attending physicians received 7 years. Warren Hollis received life. Hargrove Medical Center renamed its Patient Advocacy Office. It is called the Dorothy Calloway Patient Services Center now. There is a small, framed photograph of her on the wall inside the door, the one from our anniversary trip to Vermont the year she retired, her hair coming loose in the wind off the lake, laughing at something I had said that I can no longer remember. She looks exactly like herself. My son came home for the first month after the verdict and wouldn't leave until he was sure I was all right. He's a good man, my son, careful and steady, the way his mother was careful and steady. He would sit at the kitchen table with me in the evenings and we would talk about her, the real her, the daily ordinary her who mispronounced words she had only ever read and never heard spoken aloud, who could not watch competitive cooking shows without providing a running commentary, who cried at the end of Charlotte's Web every single time, even though she had read it to probably 400 children over 30 years of teaching. My daughter handled it differently. She got quiet, then she got to work. She joined a patient advocacy organization in Massachusetts, started volunteering on weekends. She told me that she wanted to do what her mother had done, see what her mother had seen, but do it with more people behind her. I told her Dorothy would have found a way to be exasperated and proud at the exact same time. I still have questions, things I turn over at night when the house is quiet. How many times did she sit in that little room alone and wonder if she was making the right choice? Did she consider telling me? Did she write drafts of that letter that were less calm, less resolved, less certain, and decide that wasn't the version she wanted to leave behind? Was she afraid in those last weeks? Or had she made peace with what she knew might be coming? I will not get answers. That is something I have had to accept. The dead leave what they leave, and the rest is silence. What I choose to believe is this, that the last morning of her life was an ordinary morning, that she drank her coffee looking out at the cardinals the way she always did, that she kissed me on the cheek before she left for the hospital and meant it in the full and simple way she always meant it, that she was, in whatever measure she could manage, at peace. It is the only version I can carry. Gary Hutchins came back in the spring to fix a separate problem, a cracked fitting on the water heater. I made him coffee, and we sat at the kitchen table while the repair dried, and I told him what I could tell him, the version that left out the parts that were still too heavy to carry in conversation. He listened, and when I was done, he looked at his coffee cup for a moment. "She sounds like she was something," he said. "She was everything," I said. He nodded like that made sense. It is a Sunday in late autumn now. The leaves came down early this year, and the yard is bare, and the light in the afternoons has that flat, honest quality that I have always associated with New England November. My son drove up yesterday with his wife and the grandchildren, and we all had dinner together around the kitchen table, the table where Dorothy and I had drunk probably 10,000 cups of coffee in 31 years, the table where my daughter had finished a science project the night before it was due at 11 o'clock in the 6th grade, the table where my son had sat across from me at 19 years old and told me he had decided he was going to study city planning because he believed cities could be built to serve the people who actually lived in them. Dorothy would have had opinions about the pasta. She always had opinions about the pasta. In an hour, I will drive to the cemetery by myself. It is a quiet place on a gentle hill, old oak trees, a view of the river in the distance. Her headstone reads, Dorothy Ann Calloway, 1960 to 2023, beloved wife and mother, and then the words my children and I chose together, the ones that felt most true. She saw what needed to be done, and she did it. I bring white chrysanthemums because they last longer in the cold. I talk to her, tell her about the grandchildren, about my daughter's advocacy work, about the small and ordinary news of our lives. I tell her that Hollis is in federal prison and will die there. I tell her that the billing office at her hospital has her name on it now, that her photograph is on the wall, that the work she did is not forgotten. I tell her I miss her every morning when I make the coffee. I tell her I'm trying to do the things she asked me to do in that letter, to live fully, to not be consumed. It is slow work, living fully. At 66, after 31 years of being half of something, learning to be whole on your own is not a thing that happens in a season. But I am in the effort of it. I have started going to a woodworking class on Thursday evenings at the community center. My daughter says this is the most predictable thing she has ever heard, and she means it affectionately. I have started calling old friends I let lapse in the years of grief. I have started accepting dinner invitations that I would have turned down 6 months ago. It is not the life I had. It will never be that life. But it is a life. And she wanted me to have one. And I owe her the attempt. The grandchildren are running in the backyard now, something involving the rake and a pile of leaves that has already been redistributed far beyond its original location. My son is standing at the kitchen window watching them and smiling at something. I pull on my jacket and check my inside pocket for the letter I always carry now, the 3 yellow legal pad pages in Dorothy's handwriting, worn soft at the folds. I walk outside to join my family. The lantern on the kitchen windowsill is on, visible through the glass from the yard, small and steady in the afternoon light. The cardinal is on the feeder. Thank you for listening. If you have loved someone quietly, stubbornly, at cost to yourself, I see you. If you are carrying something you think you have to carry alone, I am here to tell you that the people who love you want to help carry it. Let them. Please. Before it's too late, you don't have to build a hidden room. You just have to say the words. The people around you, they want to hear them. Whatever burden you're holding, set some of it down. Let someone else help you carry the rest. That is what she would say. It is what she tried to say, in 3 pages on yellow paper, in a room behind a wall, in a voice recorded on a laptop that a plumber found by accident on a Tuesday morning in November. Let the people who love you, all the way through.